take over?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you very much. As you can see, we are part of an organisation, or I am part of an organisation called Better Off with Learning. And we genuinely believe that everybody is better off with learning. And so today, even if you take one thing away, I think that that's a really positive thing. So it's all about sharing your information and reinforcing that information with yourself so that you can make some changes, some positive changes. Now, what we'll be talking about today is communication strategies, and as Kerry mentioned, this is the first part of a three-part series that we are going to be holding. So we'll be talking about some key communication strategies that will help you to deal with all of your customers, deal with the people that you work with, deal with your families as well. So these are communication strategies that can be used throughout your life and throughout your interactions with the people that you see on a daily basis. We will be going through the communication strategies today, then communication strategies next week, and then following that we will build up, as we mentioned before, to dealing with difficult people or challenging customers. So today we're going to be talking briefly about why is communication important in business, particularly your businesses, and some of your businesses are small businesses, some large and some medium. And it really doesn't matter what size you are, because people are people, and we all want to be communicated with in a really genuine and helpful manner. So we're going to be talking about that. Why is that important? We're going to be talking about what does it mean to be a great communicator, because often we see and we hear people say, yeah, I'm a really good communicator. But then when we say, well, what does that mean? What do you do to be a great communicator? We sometimes draw some blanks. So we're going to be talking to you about that, and the key things around that are going to be questioning, listening, and empathy skills. So this will start us off, and then as we move on, we can build on some of those skills. Now, why is communication important? So most of us, the initial part of the communication, whether we're talking to customers, clients, our employees, it's all about building rapport. Now, there's a key reason why we want to build rapport. So we want to make sure that we have clear messages. In business, we really want to make sure that we assess situations appropriately. And when we're talking about assessing situations appropriately, that is all about what is it, what does the client need, what does the customer need, and like I mentioned, even your family members can be considered your customers or your clients. What is it that they're looking for so that you can offer them the best possible solutions? And I think as builders and contractors and subcontractors, you're really looking to offer the best possible solution for your customers. It also helps our customers to define goals. It also helps you to define your goals and to create the synergies that you need to create. Now, for me, communication, and the ultimate part of communication, is about building trust. Now, when we talk about building trust, and there's a lot of research that has gone into building trust, and that is another topic that we can discuss. But today I just want to touch on that. Most of the studies that have been done on the most successful teams and the most successful people and the most successful outcomes are the ones that have an excellent level of trust. And there's a gentleman by the name of Patrick Lencioni who has written a book about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And we turn it around and we talk about the 5 functions of a team. So if you're thinking about your business, you're thinking about your clients, you guys are a team. And if you want to make that the most successful team possible, then you must have the essential piece of trust. Now, without great communication, open communication, you won't be able to build the rapport, and then you won't be able to get the trust. So that is why we want to get the trust and maintain the trust throughout that relationship, which takes me into that great working relationships, which you will continue to have if you continue to have those open conversations. sometimes those conversations can be enormously difficult, particularly during a project where things are starting to get tricky, budgets start to get tight, and so it becomes a little bit stressed and stressful. So how do we keep those lines of communication open? We also know that communication is incredibly important for delivering those outstanding outcomes and excellent customer service. And again, we can talk about what does excellent customer service look like, and we'll do that as we move forward. Or one of the main things that we all want when we're working with our clients and customers, and those can be builders or subcontractors, anybody in the team, we do want that win-win situation. So is everybody happy? Yes, I've delivered a great outcome, and yes, the client is happy with our outcome, but also are they happy with the way we got to that process or got through that process? How did we go along the journey? Were we able to have a win-win throughout that? So that takes me to communication, and what does excellent communication really look like, and what does that mean? So there are three components, as I mentioned, to communication, and we're going to be talking about those three components. So when we ask people, when we interview people about why are you an excellent communicator, or what does excellent communication look like, we're really looking for people who say, look, yes, we're great communicators, but what that really means to us is we're really great at asking questions, we're really great at listening to you, and demonstrating that we've listened to you, because that's really, really important. And then the other one is that we show empathy. We show empathy when times are tough, when times are going well. And today we're going to talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy. There is a significant difference, and we're going to see if we can put the right jigsaw pieces together. So today let's start off with just talking quickly about the collaborative style of communication. So we really need to make sure that when we are discussing, when we are talking to our customers and we're discussing projects and plans and next steps, it is definitely a two-way process. We are understanding the message and we are actually working out how we should interpret that message. This is really important because we will talk about next week about body language and tone of voice and the words that we use when we are communicating. But when we are interpreting the message, we really need to be focused on all of those aspects so that we can have that clear, collaborative communication. And we really want to focus on continuously building the rapport throughout our relationship. Rapport building happens not just at the beginning of a relationship, but throughout that whole process. So today we're going to be talking about questioning, as I mentioned, and I particularly like this quote. He who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes. He who does not ask a question remains a fool forever. This is a Chinese proverb, and I believe strongly that questioning skills are the fundamentals in business and really understanding the customers, really understanding your clients, so that you can provide the best solution at every step of the way. Not just the overall solution, but the solutions along the way. So we're going to be talking about the different types of questions. Now, you may have heard of different types of questions, and when you were at school, and perhaps when I was at school, there were, we used to say that questions were made up of, the open questions were made up of what, why, when, where, and how, and that there was a whole lot of other questions that were called closed questions. Research has shown, and over the years, things have changed a little bit about the way we look at questions, and you can really put questions into all different types of categories, but I like to think of two types of categories: closed questions and open questions. Now, closed questions are those questions that give you the yes or no answer, and we're really experts at that, and I'll talk to you about why I think we're experts at that. There are limited choice questions. Those questions usually start with which would you prefer or when would you prefer. And remember, in days gone by, we used to say that the which and the when were open questions, but really they're closed questions because they only give you a single, often quantifiable fact, or they just give you a choice. So which would you prefer, Monday or Tuesday, or which month of the year would you prefer to start in? So there's a limited choice, and so hence we would consider those closed questions. Those questions are excellent for guiding us. So sometimes right at the beginning of a conversation we might use a closed question. We might use limited choice, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But really we tend to use the closed questions closer to the end of our discussions, and I'll show you a little bit of a funnel as to how that works. The other type of question is open questions. Now, open questions provide information. They give you scope to give information, or they give scope to the other person to give information that they deem important. So not what you think is important, not what you think the solution is, because often we have a solution in our head and we want to guide our customers towards that solution. We often do that by asking lots of closed questions, but if we were smart, we would use open questions to get the customer to give us all of the information that's in their head so that we then know how to prioritize where we head with that. So let's talk about closed questions first. And as I said, I think that generally speaking, people are very much experts at asking closed questions. So there are two, as you can see on the screen, there are two paths there. Now, a closed question often takes us down a particular path, and that path is the path that we already have in our head. So based on our past experiences, we start to ask closed questions so that we can guide our customer to where we want them to go. Sometimes that's really useful, but often that can lead to a situation where we are interrogating, or it sounds like we're interrogating our customers. It gets kind of boring for the customer to answer one closed question after another, where we could quite quickly get to more information if we ask those open questions. But then the other picture there, you can see that there is a split in the road, there's a fork in the road. Sometimes it's really important to ask a closed question, as I mentioned, to allow us to understand which path we should take, and then we can ask open questions. So then we can ask the customer what it is that they want to share with us. But that's where we need to, at the beginning we might need to say, which would you prefer, a new build or a renovation? So then we know what questions to ask next. So that takes us to the types of closed questions there are. Closed questions, as I mentioned, I think you are all excellent at closed questions. Every time you hear yourself asking some of these questions that are up on your screen, will you, do you, have you, can you, will you, which, when, should you, how many, all of those questions are closed. And now what I'm going to get you to do is start to think about, am I asking a lot of closed questions? And I think you will. If you can answer yes, no, or just a single quantifiable fact, or a Monday or a Tuesday or something like that, you know you're asking a closed questions, and you need to start to think about, hopefully, how can I open this up so that my customer can give me more information? Which brings me now to open questions. Now, open questions is about getting lots of information. Now, these are my favorite question starters, open question starters. So what are your thoughts on this? Please tell me about, or please tell me more about. Why is a great open question. However, it can get a little bit tricky. So we often encourage people to start their sentences with, please tell me why. Because if I said to you, why did you choose to wear that shirt today? Often people start to get defensive and they think, oh, what's wrong with this shirt? So why can make people defensive? can make people feel uncomfortable. So really soften your whys. But why is a really great question. Why did you do that way? Or I'd be really interested in finding out why you think that's a really great process. So why is a great question. How have you done this in the past is a really good open question. So how is a good open question, but often how has become a little bit closed on some occasions. So be very careful about how you phrase your questions, because now when we ask people, how are you, usually we get a very closed or single quantifiable fact type of question and or answer, and people say good, fine, well, thanks, outstanding. So how has become a little bit of a closed question as well. If used correctly, can be a really great asset when you are doing your needs analysis. Tell me more about that is one of my favorite. And what else can you tell me? Really, if you asked 3 of these questions, perhaps please tell me about, or what are you thinking, and then tell me more about that and what else, usually you can get lots of information from your customers up front. Now, if you see on the side there is a funnel, and what we want to do is we want to try and get as much information at the top of the funnel, and as we work our way through the conversation or through the funnel, we want to start to ask limited choice or closed questions. And those limited choice and closed questions are the ones that are telling us, yes, the client wants to go ahead, yes, the client agrees with us, or no, they don't. Preferably, we want to try and get as many as 7 yeses through that funnel, and statistics show that if you can get 7 yeses along the way, then you are more likely to get a yes to the key questions that you want to know, which is hopefully, yes, we want to go ahead with you. So what questions are you asking? What questions are you asking at the different stages of each of your projects? What questions are you asking at the quote phase? How are you weeding out the tire kickers? And sometimes you have to give lots of quotes, and I imagine that you might give many quotes to get one piece of business, which is fine, but how do you work out quicker or quickly who is just looking initially to get 3 quotes, as we're often recommended to do? What sort of questions are you asking at the planning phase, at the demolition phase, throughout updates, about budgeting, and really about relationship management? So when you're having your weekly meetings to check in with the client to see that the project is going well, what sort of questions are you asking along the way? Now, bear with me, I'm just going to escape from this, and I'm going to show you some questions that I think may be helpful. So you may want to jot some of these down. But questions I think that builders and contractors can ask in those early phases could be something like this. Have you built or renovated before? What was your experience like? What made it like that? How far along in the planning process are you? How many quotes are you getting? How many quotes have you received so far? Who have you spoken to so far? What is your proposed start date? One of the ones that I really like and can be tricky, but will definitely help you along the way, is what will help you decide on the right builder or partner for your project? Now, as you can see here, I have put down a combination of closed and open questions in this particular scenario. But you will also notice that I am trying to use as many open questions as possible so that I can get as much information from the customer as I possibly can, so that I can then direct my questions accordingly. When we are thinking about questioning skills, what you really want to do is make sure that you are kind of like Tarzan or Jane in the jungle, and you are swinging from vine to vine. So I'll just bring those notes back up again for you. And you are swinging from vine to vine, and as you are going through those questions, you want to be able to hang on to the information that they've given and then ask a question based on that. So if you ask, tell me about your other renovations, and they say the last one was a disaster or was really difficult, what you want to do is your next question, your next open question would be, tell me about what made it a difficult situation or what made it a difficult renovation. Tell me more about that. And as you swing through the jungle of questions, you should be able to gain lots of information, which then you can use to your advantage and help your customers make the right decisions. So that's an introduction to questioning skills, and there's so much more that you can do, and there are so many more questions that you can ask, and so many different ways you can ask those questions, but really it's all about planning your questions. That leads me into our next skill, beg your pardon, and that is active listening. So
actually, Gab, I'll just interrupt you. You just need to enlarge your screen again. We've got your...
Oh, okay,
that's it.
Present view. Thank you. All right, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now, with active listening, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. They're either speaking or preparing to speak. Now, this is Stephen Covey's 5th habit of highly effective people, or it comes from the 5th habit, the 7 habits of highly effective people, and the 5th habit is to seek first to understand, then to be understood. Now, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is one of those books that everybody is recommended to read. If you haven't read it, this is a great book to read, not only for your personal life, but also for your businesses. You can get it on audio for those of you who are not big readers, so that is also a really good opportunity. And I'd hazard a guess to say that you probably could get somebody to read it to you on YouTube as well. So there are many people doing that. So the key to listening or active listening is it is about letting people speak first. Now, when another person speaks, we're usually at one of 4 levels. So some people can be in the ignoring phase, and often we see that happen. They're not listening, they're focused on something or somebody else, and usually we might get what we call the verbal nods, the but they're usually not the great, very interested verbal nods. So ignoring. I often find that my husband ignores me when I'm talking about things that are important to me while he's watching the football, for example. Some of you may be in that same situation. The other thing, the other level that we find is that people are at the pretending stage. So they are pretending to listen, and again we do get some of the ahas, and every now and then they might say, oh really, or yes, and they might be able to repeat back what we have said. We also see people at the selective listening stage, or hearing only certain parts. So hearing only the things that are important to them and not important necessarily to you. So sometimes you might ask your customers about something and you will swear black and blue that you told them about a particular piece of information, and they will come back and say, no, I didn't hear that, no, I didn't know about that. We need to take responsibility when people come back to us and say, no, I don't remember that, even though you feel or you know that you have said it. We have to take responsibility that perhaps we haven't checked in to see if they really understood us and that we've understood them. The 4th level of active listening, or the 4th level of listening that Stephen Covey talks to us about, and all the research shows the same thing, that is attentively listening. So really paying attention and focusing on the words and focusing on what the customer is saying. Now, to demonstrate attentive listening, we must be able to show what it is that we know, or we've got to be able to tell the customer that we have really listened to them. Now, to do that, we need to either demonstrate that we've taken notes, We need to demonstrate through eye contact that we are attentively listening. We need to most importantly tell people what we have heard. So tell your customer what you've heard, and we call this paraphrasing or summarizing the point. So we don't want to parrot. We don't want, if the customer says, I would like my house in blue, black and brown, we don't want to say, so what you want is a house in blue, black and brown. Perhaps that would be too much parroting, but wait till they've given you more information and then confirm what you have heard. So attentively listening is one of the most important skills that you can have. The fifth level of listening, which Stephen Covey says is what he believes is the most important level of listening, and I agree, is empathetic listening. Now that's listening with the intent to understand. Now when we're talking about the listening with the intent to understand, this piece is to understand how the customer is feeling, how your client is taking in the information that's happening around them. And when we're talking about empathy, we're talking about people's feelings. If you can identify the feelings that the customer is telling you or demonstrating to you, and you can then speak that, so if you can then identify those feelings and verbalize those feelings back to the customer, you will be in a much better situation. So if somebody says to you, I am really angry about this situation, it is important that you identify or that you acknowledge, and that's the key word here, is that you acknowledge their feelings. So you would probably start your sentence with, it sounds like you're really frustrated with the situation. Is that correct? And you want to get a yes out of that customer. If the customer swears at you but it is in agreement, at least you've got agreement. That's the first step of helping you calm a customer down. It doesn't matter whether somebody is anxious or happy. Usually the number one reason for couples counselling is people say to the counsellors is, I haven't been heard, he hasn't or she hasn't listened to me. And it's because they haven't had their feelings acknowledged. So when we're talking about empathetic listening, it's not just listening to the content, but it's also acknowledging the feelings. So some of the listening techniques that I can recommend to you, some more anyway from what I've just mentioned, is silence. Sometimes when you're listening, you feel like jumping in because you have the solution. You've been there, you've done that, you know the answer, you know some great solutions. But it is really important when you're listening to be quiet. Sometimes we call it, not very technically, the shut up technique. So really take in, allow the other person to share the information that they need to share with you. Paraphrasing, as I mentioned, always improves communication. So repeat back to the customer what they've said, preferably in your own words. This technique can feel a little bit awkward when you're learning it or when you're using it at the beginning. But once you become an expert through consistent use and through consistent practice, it will become second nature to you, and you will find that you will be considered an excellent communicator. People won't know exactly what it is that you're doing. They won't be able to pinpoint it, but they'll say, gosh, he or she, they're a great communicator, they're a good listener. But it's because you're able to paraphrase and to acknowledge their feelings. So using listening sounds to repeat emotions and feelings without disagreement or agreement, those are also really good. We get those through the aha, but those are different to the pretending and ignoring, They're different. Those are different sounds. So we want to be able to, particularly if you're on the phone, to do the aha, and they're just encouraging your client or your customer to continue to talk. And again, as we mentioned, summarizing, which is very, very similar to paraphrasing. So summarizing is almost a dot point of what you have understood the client to be saying. So some more listening habits. Never interrupt, take lots of notes, listen for the overtones. So sometimes you really need to read between the lines, really paying attention to body language and to tone of voice and the pace of somebody's voice. And we'll talk about those things in the next session. So if you're interested in learning more about the visual, the verbal and the vocal, we'll talk about those next week. And again, really limit your own talking, concentrate on what is being said, and then ask for more information. Keep asking, keep probing for more information when we're talking about listening. Now, one of the things that I really am focused on when we're talking about listening, and I'd like you to start to think about how is it that I can become a better listener. And to do that, we really want you to be listening out for people's feelings and identifying those feelings, whether they're happy, sad, mad, angry, anxious. They're really important. And sometimes there's those anxious feelings at the beginning of your journey with a customer, because they might be anxious about and they might be nervous, but they also might be excited about the project ahead. But also anxiety can come up during the project when budgets are stretched and along the way. I know when I was doing my renovation, the first few weeks were euphoric and it was exciting and everything was new, and then as the renovation progressed, it all became more stressful and more difficult for me to make those constant decisions. So I really needed my partners, and I talk about my partners as my builders and the team working with me to guide me and to help me through that process. Now, what I'd like you to do is have a think about here, and I'd like you to picture this. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a parable. Now, picture yourself as some of the characters that I'm going to talk to you about, and the characters are going to be sympathy and apathy and empathy. And I'd like you to think of Joan or the woman in the river as your customer or as your client. So really think about this as we're going through this particular parable. Now, we have a woman called Joan who has fallen into a river, and she is getting the river is getting increasingly more turbulent. As she moves down the river, she realizes that she is moving to a large waterfall. Now, as she's floating towards the waterfall, she realizes that this could be the death of her, and she starts to get more and more worried and then panic. And she starts to panic, and she's not thinking clearly, and she starts to swallow some water. Now, think about your own clients as we're doing this. When might they be panicked? As Joan is nearing the waterfall, she sees a person, perhaps you, called Sympathy, standing on the shore. She calls out for your help. You, Sympathy, see her immediately, and then you start to recall the time you struggled in the water, and Sympathy thinks, poor Joan, I feel sorry for her. Sympathy rescues Joan by jumping into the river to help her swim out. Now, if we're thinking about that as a strategy, is that a great strategy to help Joan? Is that what's likely to happen to Joan and to Sympathy by jumping in to help her out? Because we feel sorry for Joan. They are both in the river and heading towards the waterfall, so Sympathy has acted out of sympathy. She felt for Joan, and she's jumped in hastily after thinking about her own experience. She, for a moment, has forgotten her own boundaries and jumped in. Now, in a professional supporting relationship, is this the most effective strategy? Perhaps not. Sympathy is having the kind of relationship with somebody in which something affecting one party will have either a similar effect on the other. So showing sympathy for another could allow you to share feelings with others. When a friend cries, you cry. When your colleagues get angry at someone, it makes you angry at the same person, and that's what we call sympathizing. Now, further down the stream, Joan encounters apathy. After calling out to apathy for help, she sort of says, apathy looks around and she says, how am I going to respond? Apathy heard the call, she maybe felt a little bit about it, but thought, that's not my problem. I'm not going to do anything about that. Now, sometimes we might feel apathetic about a client, particularly if a client is getting very difficult. So have you ever been in a situation where you have demonstrated apathy? Is that really a professional way to support your client or to support a relationship? Perhaps not. As Joan goes further along the river, she is thinking, gosh, I really need help. And she spots antipathy. So antipathy hears Joan's cries for help, and rather than helping, she recalls the time upstream when she has told Joan, it may not be a good idea for you to swim in that river. Antipathy is fed up and annoyed. Antipathy knew she was right and was going to let Joan know. She walks along the riverbank, says, I told you not to swim in the river. You never listen. You are so silly. Now, sometimes I know that you might feel the same way about your clients. You've recommended something to them, and they have not gone with you, and then something happens that might not be so great. And you might feel like saying, no, I told you so. Is this the best way to deal with your relationships? This is, probably not the best, most supporting relationship. As we go further down the river, Joan is getting closer to the waterfall and her panic is rising. She lets out one last call for empathy. Empathy is standing on the shore. Now, empathy sees Joan. She pauses for a moment, sees and feels Joan's panic. She's authentically concerned and thinks about jumping in, but knows maybe that's not the best and safest way of helping. So when we're talking about empathy, empathy says with both feet firmly on the bank, I'm going to find a rope, I'm throwing it in, and I'm throwing a lifeline to Joan. Joan grabs it, and as she walks down the bank with her, empathy slowly pulls her into the shore. Now, what's empathy? Why is it important in a professional supportive relationship to show empathy? So when we're talking about empathy, we're talking about the ability to share another person's feelings and emotions, putting yourself into the other person's shoes and genuinely accepting and validating those feelings, but not jumping in with them. You might not even agree with the situation that the customer or Joan is in. In fact, you might disagree with the situation and you might have said you shouldn't have done that in the first place. However, empathy helps to help that person through the process. Now, how do I demonstrate empathy, you might be asking? Because we often think that we might be empathetic, but really we're sympathetic. So how is it that you're going to do that? Now, accurately identify the person's emotional state is probably the most important thing. And then, so not only identify it, but then acknowledge it. So when we're talking about effectively communicating, one of the things that we recommend, highly recommend, is that you practice your skill around saying, I can see it, and this is how I acknowledge it. Now, if you have a look at the first box on your slides there, it says a reflective, and there are some examples of how you can start your sentences when we are reflecting or demonstrating empathy. My absolute favorite, and I do coaching and training on this with hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people, and I find the most effective sentence starter when dealing with customers is to say, it looks like you are finding this really challenging, or it sounds like this is a challenging situation for you, or it sounds like you're angry with this situation. So saying it sounds like or it looks like, if you can see them, if you're face-to-face with your customer, that is a great way to acknowledge the feelings. Now, if you're starting to acknowledge the feelings, you are then more likely to go on to the next level and say, so what I'm hearing you say is, and that is how you start to summarize the conversation. You can then confirm. It's okay sometimes to get it wrong. It's okay to have heard something incorrectly or to put your own spin on it, because we will always do that. But it is important to confirm that you've got it right, and if it's wrong, the customer or your client will quickly correct you. It's all right to do that, but at least then you are much closer to knowing what it is that you can provide as the correct solution. And there are some other ways, some other sentence starters on your screen here, and I'll show you some more now. I find that when we're talking about building relationships with our clients, it's about let's work together to come up with a solution. I particularly like that as a sentence starter as well, when we're talking about demonstrating that we are actively listening, we're showing empathy. Again, we would probably need to work on all of the questions that we need to ask, and sometimes that takes preparation and planning. But that is what we would recommend when we're talking about how do we guide our customers and our clients to a position where we can provide them with the best solution. So that brings me to the end of today's session, and what I wanted to get you to think about is some of your powerful insights, and today may have been a confirmation of all the things that you're already doing right. You may now have confirmed to yourself, yes, I am a great communicator, or perhaps I need some more help with active listening, or perhaps I need to have a look and think about the types of questions I'm asking. Am I asking too many closed questions, or am I not asking enough open questions? What open questions can I be asking? Now remember, open questions start with what, where, why, and how, if they are asked properly. Where and when and how can be considered closed questions because they give you those single quantifiable facts. But it is really important to ask those three main ones. Please tell me about, please tell me more, why are you thinking that? There's some really great questions that you can ask. Actively listening, demonstrate that by summarizing and paraphrasing, and perhaps showing empathy. How are you demonstrating that you are seeing and feeling those happy feelings that your clients are demonstrating and some of those anxious ones? Here are some, you might want to go over your notes over the next couple of days. You may also like to follow us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We share insights and inspiration and more learning every day. So you may find that you will see some information from today's webinar. You will see some information from today's webinar on today's Facebook feed. So you're more than welcome to have a look at that, and you can also find some more information on Better Off with Learning. I know that Kerry would like to, if you could provide some feedback, and we would love to hear about what other training you'd be interested in. I am going to hand over to Kerry now. So thank you very much for having me here today, and I will be staying on the line to answer any questions that you may have. Over to you, Kerry.
Thank you, Gabriella. We have got a few questions coming through. James has asked, should we acknowledge that the customer is right? And he's also sort of added to that, you know, what do we do if someone is wrong but not willing to accept the outcome?
Yes, and so in those situations, when somebody is acknowledging or not acknowledging that they've made a mistake, we need to really help them save face. You may have heard this. This is a Japanese term about saving face with a customer. So I think it's really important that we guide them through that and perhaps make them feel like, although this isn't the most ideal scenario, so this is not the right way way to do something, but guide them into a situation where they can dig themselves out of the hole. Make them feel comfortable to help them change their mind. So how do you do that? You ask more questions. How would you feel if we continued down this particular path? How would you feel if this was the outcome and it didn't work out as planned or as you planned? So if you ask the questions, then they start to see the situation from a different perspective, and they might then say, oh, perhaps we should try it a different way, or they might still go down that wrong path or that incorrect path, and if that's our client, we might need to just keep going along that path if that's what they want, or we might need to extract ourselves from that and say, I won't be able to do that because that won't, I know that won't work and I don't want to put my name to it. Sometimes that's a decision that you might need to make.
So we're always
answered both parts of that.
Yeah, well, I'll check with James. I'll get him to just jot that down if that's answered his question. But I guess we're always taught that the customer is right. So I guess it does get tricky when you know the customer isn't right.
And look, that's about addressing. Look, we know that the customer isn't right, but what we have to do is we need to make the customer feel as right as possible. So we need to acknowledge what they have said. It doesn't mean we need to agree with the customer. So we might know, because of our past experience and our knowledge, that that is not correct, but we need to acknowledge what the customer has said, and we can only do that by demonstrating active listening, and when we show that, we need to be able to do that through our paraphrasing. So, what you're saying, customer, so let's say Barry, what you're saying, Barry, is that you believe that this, and this will give you this solution. And Barry might say yes or no, but at least they know that you have listened and heard their point of view. You can then guide them with some questions, some more open questions, and some statements and some information, perhaps to a more right situation. But always acknowledge them. So stay calm throughout that whole situation, even when they're wrong.
Great. And James says yes, that answers his question. Hussain, sorry if I've pronounced that incorrectly, has asked, hi Gabriella, can you provide an example on how to ask a potential client what their budget is as an open question?
Sure. Thank you. I do have that. Look, really, sometimes it is a really tough question to ask, but what's your budget is as open as you're going to get. It is difficult. What's your budget can be closed because it has that limiting, it's a single quantifiable fact. But one of the questions that I like to ask my clients, and I'm not a builder, but I certainly build projects for people, I also ask what's negotiable and what's not negotiable in this particular project. And then when you start to talk about what's negotiable and what's not negotiable, you can say, what are you planning and what's your budget after that? So before you get to what's your budget, I think really the trick is to ask lots of open questions before then. Get as much information as you possibly can and then work your way down. Because what's your budget is closer to the end of the funnel in one part of the funnel. You would then move on to another part of the funnel, etc. I hope that helps.
Great. And what kind of questions can our members ask to try and avoid people who are just shopping around? How to get, I guess, really trying to find people who are really keen to engage a builder and not just shopping around?
That's a great question. So again, it's a series of questions that I would be asking, and I would be asking questions such as, how far along the planning process are you? how many quotes are you getting? Because we know that everybody's going to get lots of quotes, or not lots, perhaps 3, but we know that they're going to do that, and we're part of that process. How many quotes have you received so far is a really great question to find out where people are in that process. I'd also ask things like, what is your proposed start date? Because if their proposed start date is next month, you probably will get a good indication how far along the process they are. One of the other questions I would ask is, how clear are you about your plans? Are you working with an architect or a designer? Because if they're at that part of the process, they might, you know that you might be in with more of a chance when you are doing your quoting. I hope that answers some of those.
Yeah. Do you find that it's interesting, we're talking about empathy, and it was just something I was talking about with my husband yesterday, because I know I was speaking with a real estate agent and I worked out from his voice that he wasn't very well, and my husband had talked to him previously and he said, oh, he never told me he wasn't well. I said, oh, well, he didn't tell me, but I could feel it. I not feel it, but I could sense it in the way he was speaking. And do you find that sometimes there is that some people have that problem with identifying or having empathy with people, and is it something that you can learn?
Empathy is definitely a skill. So this is a great question. Empathy is a skill. Sympathy is not really a skill. Lots of people can be sympathetic very easily. So, oh, I know how you feel is what people say when they're showing sympathy. Whereas with empathy, it's an absolute skill that you can learn, but it is one, if it doesn't come to you naturally, it is one that you have to hone in on. And just like every skill, like every habit, it's something that you have to practice. So what I highly recommend is that you start every sentence, really, or every conversation that you are having with, it sounds like you're really excited about this, or it sounds like you are a little bit ill. But some people are so focused on what it is that they want to say next and what they want as an outcome, they don't stop to listen for those cues and those clues that somebody else might be giving them around how they're feeling. So perhaps in that situation, and not to say that your husband does not know how to show empathy, but perhaps he was not focused on the clues and the cues that the real estate agent was giving. And you were. And so some people are more in tune to that.
Yeah.
But it is something to practice.
Sorry, Craig's made a good suggestion about some of those questions that you can ask to pre-qualify people. He suggested that, you know, you could have that on a qualifying form that you can email to clients prior to meeting with them. So that way you've got those questions covered. Sometimes people are maybe a little bit uncomfortable asking some of those questions.
Yeah, that's a great strategy, and definitely to send those through prior. And look, if your clients are willing to fill those questions out, that's really helpful. The other thing that you could do is just send those questions to the client and say, next time we meet or next time we speak, I'll be going through these questions with you, and so they don't feel so uncomfortable in that situation because they're there in front of them and the client has seen them before. So they may not actually fill them in for you straight away, but they certainly have had the opportunity to think about them. So really great suggestion. Thank you for that.
And do you also recommend, you mentioned one of the ways of showing that you are interested and active listening is to take notes. Would it be a good idea for people to perhaps have a pre-formed checklist that they could take to a meeting, and that way they can remind themselves of the sort of questions, but it also shows, I guess, demonstrates that they're actively, you know, listening and taking notes?
Sure. I certainly do think that makes you look incredibly professional. One of the things that we highly recommend is that you tell your customers and your clients, I will be taking notes today, and the reason I'll be taking notes is so that I can remember clearly what it is that you want, so that I can offer you the best possible solution. And so people love to hear that. They don't get afraid. that you are taking notes for some secret mission. The mission is theirs, and it's a mission for them, to help them. We often find that in the building industry, there aren't enough note takers. So, you know, there's the cliche, and I don't know whether it is a cliche, that builders are writing on the back of plasterboard and the back of planks and things like that. That doesn't inspire confidence in customers and clients. So if you can have a notebook, even if you don't have a questionnaire in front of you, that might be helpful for your initial meetings, and then your weekly catch-up meetings with your customers. I think that would be great. But even just having a small notebook in your back pocket to write things down, that definitely inspires confidence in your clients and your customers.
Great. I do have another question here from Vanessa. It's quite a long one, but it's probably one that a lot of people are thinking as well. But just before we do that, I see that we've reached 2 p.m. Or 2 p.m. here in Sydney. So I just thought, just quickly, if you could just touch on what we will be covering in the next webinar. I know we did talk about it briefly, but Gab, if you could just sort of let people know exactly what you'll be covering in the next session and how it's important for them.
Sure. Now, next week we're going to be talking about communication strategies next steps, which we're going to be talking about the impact of communication on people. So we're going to be talking about our verbal communication, our vocal communication, so how we say things and how that's interpreted, and our visual communication, so our body language and how that is interpreted. So we're going to be talking about the words we use, the tone, our body. We'll talk about positive and negative language, and I'll also with the time permitting, I'm also going to give you some business tips on how to answer your telephone, what you should be saying over the phone, and what messages you should leave on your voicemail and the voicemail of your customers. So there'll be some hands-on tips as well.
Great,
that's for next week.
Now, Vanessa asked, how is the best way to communicate with a client who tends to consistently interfere during the project? For example, a customer who feels the need to question every aspect of the work or wants to provide suggestions on how the job can be done. How do we communicate our expertise and explain the project is well managed without offending them, but basically asking them to leave us to our work, and we'll discuss the information further at our next meeting?
Great. Well, that's a fabulous question. Thanks, Vanessa. Now, you probably encountered this a little bit throughout the process. One of the things that we like to suggest is a pre-qualifying question early on in the project, but somewhere in the project I would be asking this question again and again and again. How do you want us to communicate with you? How much involvement do you want to have in this project? Would you like to have, you know, high-level information provided to you, or would you like a lot of detail? So asking some of those questions helps you identify what type of customer this is going to be. But now that you are in this situation where the customer is really being very much a part of the build, what I would recommend is acknowledge them and say, every time they give you some feedback, say thank you. It's a gift that they are sharing that information with you. You may not feel that. You may need to fake it till you make it, but I would really thank them. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. That's something that we will take note of and we will put down for discussion in our next meeting. So really thank them. I would also go back to them and find out what part of the process is making them feel nervous, or what part of the process is making them feel like they need to give you the suggestions and to share their information with you, because this may be an indication that they are feeling nervous and anxious with the process. They might need to have twice weekly meetings with you just so that they can feel part of it. So there's a whole lot of underlying information that this particular client might be giving you, and we need to take responsibility and say, actually, maybe we're not managing that client as well as we could. We might think we are, but let's check in with what we can do better to help this client feel less stressed or nervous, or less with a lesser desire to keep butting in or interfering, as you were saying, Vanessa. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think Vanessa thinks perhaps they're just particularly painful people, but but said thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank them always for their information and their sharing, because that's always better than what we really want to say.
That's right. Carly also has a question on how do we tell a client not to make alterations direct with a trade? They must make any alterations with us as the builder.
Right. So I would also go back to asking that client, what does a really successful build look like to you? So what does a really successful project look like to you, Mr. Customer? And the customer will say, oh, well, smooth sailing, and give you all those answers. Oh, yeah, that you handle all the trades and the contractors and stuff like that. And so I would then go back to them and say, look, so that we can have the best possible outcome for you, and that we meet our deadlines, and you might want to remind them of their deadlines that they came up with as well with you, so that we can meet those deadlines. One of the things that we find that works really well is if we have direct communication with our contractors, and that all the communication comes through us. So rather than you have the conversation with the contractors, which might confuse them because we've given them other instructions, so please give us that information so that we can have a smooth project with an end date of X. And I think that the customer will appreciate that, because they want it to go well and they want it to finish on time.
And again, I guess this is something that if in future you can, with clients, is bring this up right at the very beginning. And I think James mentioned, it's usually detailed in the contract document, that perhaps these detailed conversations need to be, gone through at the very beginning, so there's no misunderstanding, and hopefully everybody is on the same page. It does come back to that communication, doesn't it?
Yes, and it's getting that, it's spending as much time upfront in that funnel and getting as much information as possible, and then starting off little mini funnels every week throughout the process, throughout the project. So and having those funnels all the time, checking in, asking those open questions. What's working well? What could we be doing differently? They're our two favourite questions. We have loads and loads of open questions that we recommend to our customers, so that they can pick and choose which ones. And so perhaps having a stable of questions that are open, that you can refer to before you go and see a client. Sometimes you don't need the checklist. Sometimes you just need to have a look at those questions just before, so that you're reminded.
Yeah, and it would probably be great if you have staff to make sure they're on the same page and give them some guidance.
Correct.
Well, I don't think there are any more questions, and we have gone over time, but if anybody has a question, you can quickly type it in. Otherwise, I will wrap things up, and hopefully everybody can join us next week. As I said, just if you haven't registered, you need to do that, because the webinars fill up very quickly these days, and I will be sending out the invitation to the broader membership in the next couple of days. So jump onto our website, register, just make sure you've locked in your position. That would be great. So no more questions have come through, so I will wrap things up here, and thank you everybody for joining us across Australia, and thank you to Gabriella for our first webinar together. it's been great. I've learned a few things as well, so perhaps I can change the way I communicate with my husband as well. So thank you,
Perfect.
everybody, and hopefully you can put some of this stuff into practice, and we'll touch base next week and see how it's gone. So thank you, and thank you, Gabriella.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.